Well, thank you very much. It's kind of special today because Ed Week, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, is one of the major avenues for people to hear about research, to hear what's happening, not only in terms of the kind of research that I do, looking at other people's work, but also the kind of research you do when you look at the evidence and what makes the difference in your classrooms and schools. It's also great to be here because it was only last week that I shifted my whole operation that I've been running for many years from Cognition in New Zealand to base it here in Corwin in the US. And so that's kind of special for me, so that's really great. And the third thing is it's a great privilege to be the warm-up act for Peter DeWitt. The story. Set the scene. What I've tried to be doing over the last few years is to change the conversation around what works to what works best. To try and understand why it is that in education, everybody claims they have evidence that what they do works. And my challenge to any of you is, have you ever met a teacher who has said they're below average? Have you ever heard an academic who doesn't know the answer? And have you ever met a policymaker who just knows truth? And it just seems strange when I started this many years ago that we're in a profession where everybody knows the answer. And like you, I've been a kid. It's not true. There is variance out there. And so the argument was, could I put everything along this continuum? And yes, the visible learning work has been very much focused on achievement. And given I've got 250 million students, I kind of got a lot of achievement from classroom tests to standardized tests. And certainly the observation is that in our discipline, we don't have a history of taking kids out and putting them in a laboratory. Almost all this data is based on what happens in real schools with real kids. Yes, there are many other important outcomes of schooling. And there's a group in Germany that I'm working with that's looking at the same, asking the question about affective and motivation. We published an article last year that did the same thing but looked at how students learn. Others have looked at special needs students. And of course, there are many other outcomes of schooling. But I make no apology. Achievement is one of them. And so the question is, could you put everything across this continuum? One of the criticisms is, but wait a moment, surely it would be different for 5-year-olds and 15-year-olds. Surely it's different in California and Vermont. Surely it's different with girls and boys and left-handed and right-handers. And that is a critical question that we can answer empirically. In the jargon, they're called moderators. And for the last 200 years, we've been searching for them because our whole premise of individual differences assumes that this continuum would be different. And I'm sure you've heard the argument. My kids are different. This school is different. Now, obviously, I've looked at that very closely because I started believing that was the case. I struggled to find any evidence for that. That doesn't mean to say kids don't differ. What it means to say that what works best with special needs kids, struggling kids, works best with gifted kids. What works best with 5-year-olds with 15. And the one that upsets most people, that which works best with English, works best in maths and phys ed and physics and panel beating. Put that aside. I wanted to ask across the influences from the child, the family, the school, the parents, the finances, the accountability, you name it. And you can see now I keep adding. And I keep adding, which frustrates a few of my colleagues who say, why does it keep changing? Well, research keeps being added. And I was trained in my undergraduate days in philosophy of science to look for falsifiability. And I want to be the first person to publish something and says, I was wrong. If a meta-analysis comes out tomorrow and shows class sizes way up there, I want to be first. The model's wrong, it doesn't work. So far, for the last 20 years, that hasn't happened. It's very comforting. That keeps reinforcing the model. But you still must constantly look for that evidence that what we believe, what we say, may not be the case. That's the distribution of 250 million kids. And the message, which I want to introduce today, because I don't want to belabor this, is that the red zone is the things that we do that are negative. And Ed Week colleagues, there's not much you do that harms kids. Isn't that good news? And some of those are perfectly sensible in the red zone. The effect size of bullying on achievement is minus 0.3. Makes sense. And when you take those into account, 95 to 97% of things that we do to kids enhances their learning. All you need to enhance learning is a pulse. And this is why every teacher knows they have evidence that what they do works. Every principal knows what they do works, because it does. Virtually everything works. If you set the bar, it doesn't work. Can we enhance learning? This is why every politician can argue correctly that their policy works. And why every parent can run your school better than you, because they have evidence that their ideas work. We've got to stop asking what works. We've got to start asking what works best. And what I've tried to do is work out the story underlying the difference between the blue zone and the yellow zone. And it took me 20 years to work out that story, because the evidence kept getting in the way of a good story, but I had to go back and make sure it was simpatico with the evidence. And that was the visible learning story. To give you an example, here's a few. Which of those do you think are in the yellow zone, the desirable zone? Which do you think are in the blue zone, sorry, the desirable zone? Which are in the yellow, and which do you think are in the red? Convince your neighbour. You all got neighbours. Well, none of them. And I put it to you that quite a few of these dominate the debates in the policy, in the newspapers, and in the staff rooms. We love to discuss the things that don't matter. Relative to the average of 0.4, you can see they're quite trivial. And for some of those, we have spent, your country and mine, billions of dollars implementing them and wondering why they don't show the great effect. And you also know then what happens. They blame you. We've got to stop and change the narrative and get away from this politics of distraction. Because look at those numbers, they're tiny. The details don't matter today, the relativity matters. And I want you to contrast it with the next slide. These tiny effects, and look at those. Wow. That which dominates the blue zone is expertise. The expertise of the educators. It's not about the kids. It's not about the structure. It's not about the curriculum. It's not about the way in which we put kids in rooms together in whatever shape or form. It is about the expertise. And my mission is to ask you to join me and value this expertise and get away from this creeping amateurism that's coming into our business. And when you go back and look, as you saw in that blue zone, there are plenty of schools and educators in that blue zone now. Excellence is all around us. In fact, the visible learning story is this simple. Have you got the courage to reliably identify those in the blue zone, form a coalition of success around them, and then invite those in the yellow zone to join? And I hate to say this, but there's not a lot of courage out there. Everyone wants to go to Finland or Shanghai or Singapore and come back with the answer. It's here, in your states right now. And so identifying that success. And one of the other observations is that the correlation between expertise and experience after 5 years in our business is zero. It's right throughout, regardless of experience. Nothing wrong with experienced people, of course. But it's the expertise that I want to privilege. And each of these requires incredible expertise, which is already here. In fact, what keeps me going is as I travel around the world, I am stunned at the amount of expertise. What I find fascinating as a researcher, And I'm not bad at searching literature, and I ask how many articles have ever been written on scaling up success in our business, and the answer is 5. Typically what we do is we say, oh, it's not working, it's terrible, we have to fix it. Why aren't we saying, hey, we've got incredible excellence, how do we grow it? How do we spread it like a virus? And the other bad news with that model is it's also an expensive model, but it's the right way to spend our monies. And certainly what I did in the Visible Learning book, which came out 10 years ago now, is created a league table, a list of influencers. And somehow I regret that because I never meant for people to go and say, tick, 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 I'm doing those, cross, 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 I'm not doing those. I don't regret it because it got attention. Otherwise, why did you read the book? And given it was my 10th book, I wished I had the secret for the other 9. And so I changed the emphasis to this notion of know thy impact. I want you to see that research as probability statements. If you do these things, there's a high probability they'll have impact. But I want you to focus on what is the evidence you have in your school that these programs you introduce make a difference to the learning lives of students. And the other part, which I certainly mentioned in the first book, but I want to focus on today, is it comes back very much to how educators think. I worked for the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards when it was being set up in the 90s. We had the job of setting up all the assessment systems for it. And one of the jobs I had was to watch the videos of 1,000 English language arts teachers who had been exemplary. And my job was, what's the common elements about how they teach? There was none. I don't care less how you teach. I care about the impact of your teaching. I don't want you to go to another professional learning and hear about this is how you should teach. Here's best practice. Here are my resources. Because it misses the point. It's that moment by moment decision makings that people are making in the classroom and in the staff room that make the difference. It's how we think. And it certainly comes down to that notion of when teachers see learning through the eyes of the students. Whereas too many of our debates about how we taught. And can we improve how we teach? Now, of course, I want to worry about the teaching, but I want to worry it as a function of the impact of the students, which is why we spend a lot of time legitimizing student voice about what it means to be a learner in this classroom. In fact, the first question we often ask in our work is we interview the teachers. What does it mean to be a good learner in the school? They can usually wax lyrical. We ask the students, and if they say things like, oh, a good learner comes to school on time, sits up straight, and listens to the teacher, we know that we have a compliance in a very low learning school. Learning's a struggle. Learning's a staccato. Learning's hard work. We also know that we've got lots of fancy words in education for the bottom line. What could possibly be wrong with metacognition, self-regulation, 21st century skills, lifelong learning? Nothing. I just think it's simple. It's that. When students become their own teachers. That's what we want in lifelong learning. We want them to know what to do when they don't know what to do. And I put the observation to you that you often see that in 5-year-olds. But by age 8, most kids know their job is to come to school, to sit up straight and watch you work. What do you see when you see that? So what do you see? Beautiful mountain, yes. Don't look down. What do you see?
Going skiing.
You're going skiing, that's the spirit. What do you see, ma'am?
I see a beautiful mountain.
Okay. And I think some of you could look at the trees. Some of you might say, oh, it's a photograph that's a bit too fuzzy. Some of you might recognise Mount Everest and Lofty up there and say it's going to be exciting to go on a trip, etc. And my point is this. You all may have seen that picture differently, but the mountain didn't change. There is no such thing as immaculate perception. You can all go into a classroom, but you will see it differently. And one of the things, for instance, I won't do is people say, come and watch me teach. I can't see the mountain as a 5-year-old and a 15-year-old could. And one of the difficulties we have when we go and observe classrooms is sometimes it's our lens that we need to understand better. And certainly I struggle to see a lot of evidence that going in and sitting in the back of the room with a tick box or watching a video and evaluating someone makes any difference to the quality of the learning of those students. Primarily because the focus is too much on the teacher and not on the impact on the students. And when I know Graham Nuttall's work, where he put microphones on kids every morning of the year, every afternoon he went home, and he wrote a book called The Hidden Lives of Learners, because 80% of what happens in your class you don't see or hear. So why would I privilege your reflection of the 20%? I, however, want to help you and resource you to help see that other 80%. And so where I'm going to is, what are these ways in which we think that makes the difference, that underlies that blue zone? I have a good friend, which I'm sure some of you may know, Carol Dweck, and I was talking to her not so long ago, and she said, well, you seem to get away with it a bit more than I do. And I said, yes, Carol, because you've got one mind frame. I've got 10. But actually, Carol, I've only got one, but I say it 10 times. And that is exactly the case. As you're going to hear this morning, I'm going to reiterate number one 10 times. Because if I just do number one and people say, I don't understand it, I don't get it, then they ignore it. But they might get one of the others. So if you want to save cognitive load in your breakfast session here, just think of, I am an evaluator. When I walk into a classroom, I need to say, my job here today is to evaluate my impact. When I walk into a staff room, my job here is to evaluate my impact. When I am a policy person, I need to ask, what is my impact? And then the students are the beneficiaries. One of the questions this begs, what do you mean by impact? Well, actually, that's a really critical first question. And it's the question that we would ask a school and ask the teachers, ask the principals, what do you mean by impact? And if impact is just test scores, I think you're in a pretty barren environment. I have no trouble with test scores being in there. And just to show you, for example, some of the ones I would use. This is my view. I want to know what yours are. What do you mean by impact? What does it mean to be a good learner in the school? What does it mean to be a good learner in physics or panel beating? And you can see in this list here, respect for self, respect for others. The one that probably drives me more than anything else, is this school an inviting place to come and learn? The best predictor, according to Hank Levin's research, of adult health, wealth and happiness is not achievement at school. It's the number of years of schooling. And that doesn't mean to me that you then up the school leaving age or anything like that. It'd be crazy if we did that, because then you get more kids who don't want to be there. You put it on the other hand and you say, no, is the school an inviting place for kids to want to come back to? And wow, how easy is that to measure? Ask them. Because the passion of learning is what we're trying to develop in these students. And it is that sense of belonging. And it is about how you think. One of the difficulties, and certainly in my country, is that we have an obsession about standards and achievement. Don't you too? You started this movement about 15 years ago, and wow, I wish you'd never have done it. Because you've distorted the conversation. I want as well, looking at that that blue zone, teachers and schools are in the blue zone, their kids are getting greater than a year's learning for a year's input. I think that's pretty impressive. And that greater than a year's input is this notion of growth and progress. And it is the case that when I talk to politicians, I should say as an aside that I only do about 20 days travelling a year around the world because I have day jobs in Melbourne, and beside my university job I also have a political job. New Zealand, like your country, has fewer states. We have 27 jurisdictions, you have 50. Each of those run schools. The federal government doesn't. The federal government, however, owns an organisation called the Australian Institute for Teachers and School Leaders, and I'm the cabinet appointed chair of that. So I meet the ministers on a very regular basis, and it's quite fascinating, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I don't know how fickle it is, as I'm sure you saw in this morning's news, how fickle it is. But when I speak to these people, they say, yes, we get it. Progress, of course we want that. Then they go out and talk about high standards. Then they go out and administer standardised tests. NAPLAN in Australia, in fact, it's this week. They're doing the testing in schools, and they produce those tables that show achievement, which, as you know, is the best graph of real estate housing prices we know. But on the other hand, as I keep saying to them, if you go to progress, you distort it the other way. I want both. And so this is the kind of graph we use, and actually we label them. No one wants to be down there. Kids who start below average, low progress. What about those kids who start above average but don't get a year's growth? Cruising. What about those down here? Start below average but get greater than a year's growth. Wow, I'm impressed. And of course, everyone wants to be up there. And we have to change, educators, the narrative. They are not our best schools. They are our best schools. Why should teachers who work in schools where kids start below average and improve the rate of learning by 2 or 3 times be criticised when those who start above average and they don't add value get praised? It's distortion, it's wrong, it's misleading. And it's confusing our public who continue to believe that good schools are high achieving schools. They are not necessarily. Similarly, what we're trying to do in Australia is take the measures of narrow excellence, like NAPLAN, maths, reading, science, social studies, spelling, but that's measured in a kind of narrow way, and not get rid of it, but broaden it. I'm sure in your country, like in mine, each year the PISA results come out, published, there's a gnashing of teeth, all that kind of stuff. And many people get up and say we shouldn't do it. No, I'm the opposite. We should expand it, and I'm trying to argue to OECD. For example, I look at those kind of indicators, and I've added them. Now, they may not be the best sort, but my point is that it should be a basket of goods. And you know here in America that on PISA in terms, they're pretty average or below the world, below the 70-odd countries that do it. But when you take it to these kind of things, you get a totally different picture. Wow, look at all 3 of us down there. Aren't we in good company? And so the problem I see with the narrowness is you get a policy space where people say it's terrible, we have to change. Why would you want to change those already in the blue zone? And more often than not, the visible learning message to schools is permission to keep doing what you're doing if you're in the blue zone. And when you look at many other variables, it changes the nature of what we see as what we value. So folks, how do you in your schools communicate to your parents and your communities that we value more than just achievement? But yes, we've got achievement in there as well. And this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about know thy impact. Assessment. My background, I'm a psychometrician. I'm the person who taught those courses you all loved in research design and statistics, didn't you? And the argument we're putting here is every time you give an assessment, you, the educator, should ask, what did I learn about my impact? Which students? About what? And what was the magnitude? And if you do that, you construct assessments differently, and the kids, again, the beneficiaries. This is too strong, but let me say it. Assessments are not about kids. Assessments are about what you learn, about your impact. Of course, we can construct them so they can be about kids. But the primary purpose is assessment for us. I had a job when I was living in New Zealand for about 10 years, developing the New Zealand assessment scheme for elementary and high schools. Very briefly, teacher can go in at any time of the school year. None of this one-shot stuff. They can create an assessment. They can take between a 12 or 60-minute test. They can do it in those 3, reading, writing and maths. And I'm sure there'd not be much interest to have it in the 3 Maori language ones here, but we have 2 languages in New Zealand. They can decide on what the difficulty is of their kids. New Zealand decided 30 years ago that putting kids in year groups was bonkers. Take a group of kids of 10-year-olds. They're all over the place in their curriculum. It's not many kids that are actually working at the year 10 level. So New Zealand abolished that and they have a levels base. And say kids can be at any year, but they're in different levels. If the teacher gets this wrong, wow, they're going to be informed. They go to the curriculum. And actually you can drill down now and you can get an assessment specifically on what you're teaching today. You can decide how you're going to administer it. Pencil and paper, on screen, computer adaptive, and all that kind of stuff. It goes away into its database of somewhere between 400 and 600 million tests, creates a test within a fraction of a second. Teacher can see it, administer it. And that's the easy part. All those tests are calibrated. So it doesn't matter if they use a different test, they can measure progress. Then it comes to the reporting. Again, it's instant. You don't wait for anything. And for example, this is kind of a score report, a year 4 to 8. You can see they've measured 3 things. The red is them, the blue is the normative stuff, schools like them, or the national norms. And you can see immediately, we're not doing too well relative to the others. You can see there year 4 to year 5, there's quite a big jump. I'm the red ones. But you can see in that school from year 5 to 6 to 7 to 8, there was 0 growth. And when we first did this and the teachers saw it, they got very angry. And they brought it on their work and said, no, you're wrong. Our work gets harder and harder. And it did, whilst they asked the same easy questions. There was no growth for 4 years. We can look at individual kids in terms of the curriculum. We don't give them items. We give them curriculum concepts. Given their ability, the curriculum things we expected them to get right, and they did, the green ones. The items we expected them to get wrong, but they got right. The yellow ones, strengths. The ones they got wrong, and we expected them to get right, the gaps. And of course, the ones they got wrong, and we expect them to get wrong given their ability. And we also know that the best assessment to measure growth is an assessment where 50% of the items they get right and 50% they get wrong. That's not a sell to most kids. They want to get 80 to 100% right. But it's easy. If there's nothing in all those 4 cells, the test was lousy. And teachers and kids now know that. We can drill up to find at the school what the gaps and the strengths are, so we can know what our professional learning is about. We can also look at how kids change over time. We can follow the kids from when they start school right through to when they finish school. And we can also help the teacher understand if that's where the kid is or the class is. If they click on one of those dots above it, it will take them to a series of 10 to 12 teaching resources, 10 to 12 lesson plans, 10 to 12 open-ended objects, 10 to 12 open-ended items. And my point is it's a voluntary system. 80% of schools and teachers in New Zealand are using this tool today, 17 years later. Don't tell me teachers aren't hungry for information about their impact. But in your country, where you turn assessment into an accountability stuff, no wonder it gets distorted. How do we provide the resources that help us do our job better? I collaborate with my peers. The new number 1, teacher collective efficacy. I know Peter's going to talk about this, so I'm not going to steal your thunder here, Peter. But I worry a bit about the title, because too many people think it's about setting up a professional learning community and then having a discussion about curriculum or kids or resources. And it's no surprise to me it's starting to disappear before it's even started. I wish the title had been Teachers Collective Efficacy Fed by the evidence of their impact. And one of my jobs now is I tend to get opportunities to comment on the back of a book, endorsements, which is a bit of a pain because you have to read the whole book for those 10 words, and in those 10 words you have to prove you actually read it. And last year I had 10 books on collective efficacy. I only wrote endorsements for 2. One was Jenny Donohue's and one was Peter DeWitt's, because they got it right. And one of the things that I just comment about, that I think the 9 steps I see in this is step 4. There's actually a skill in professional learning communities. There's a skill in collective efficacy. I'll give you a hint. We're looking at the wisdom of the crowd. You know, the argument the crowd's got more wisdom than individuals. It's very, very hard to find evidence for that. It's a seductive idea, but the evidence is wanting. Except when the percentage of females in the group increase, when the amount of turn-taking increases. But they're proxies for the third one. Do the individuals have social sensitivity? I want you to think of some of your teachers at the blue zone in your school. Sometimes they're not the most socially sensitive people. Sometimes they just want to go back to their room, close the door and do their job. How do we get those teachers to be part of the collaboration? How do we get the teachers to hear and feel what it's like in the shoes of another teacher and how they're thinking? And that's the skill of a leader, to bring that social sensitivity so that you can capitalize on this incredible power of this effect size, which is 1.57. It's the highest effect size we know. Quadruples the rate of learning. When teachers work together, fed by the evidence of their impact. Probably not the nicest acronym, but hopefully we won't forget it. And what we use in this notion of collective efficacy is this: teachers are to die for. How do we have excellent diagnosis? Interventions. Oh, wow, we're brilliant at that. Everybody's got an intervention. Everybody knows the answer. In fact, my advice to you is beware of educators with interventions. More often than not, those interventions are not tied to the diagnosis. Too often, I see professional learning to do what someone wants to do. And they want to improve something they're already not bad at. And I'm saying to them, where's the diagnosis? In the same way when people say to me, John, can I have visible learning? And my question is, to what problem is visible learning the answer? And then this notion of implementation. And it certainly dawned on me as I now work in many thousands of schools throughout the world, or I don't, but the team does. You can imagine I'm an academic. I talk a lot. I'm not very good at listening as much as I should do. And you have to be a very good listener when you work in schools. Listeners of teachers and listeners of kids. But I have a team that goes around and does this kind of work. And certainly this science of interventions, the science of implementation is rather lacking. In fact, it's fascinating. Michael Barber has deliverology. Tony Bright has the Carnegie one. Ab Wandersman, I was with him yesterday, he is getting to outcomes. That's about it. Where is the science of implementation? I think we need to get smarter at that. And then, of course, how you evaluate those interventions in terms of their impact on kids, which is obviously the diagnosis. And so how do you put this as your focus of your professional learning communities and your collective efficacies? And don't tell me you haven't got the time. Get rid of a lot of the stuff you're doing now. Be brave. I want you to walk into that situation and say, I am a change agent. Come on, let me hear you say it. I am a change agent. Yeah. None of this fluffy facilitator, guide on the side stuff. You're actually very good at it. I got the data, that blue zone. Incredible number of people that are great at changing kids, which is our fundamental job. Of course, it begs the moral purpose question about how, but that's what impact is. And I have a list. May not be the best list in the world, but it's not a bad list. Between what I'm talking about, the activator, the change agent, and all that facilitative, constructivism, guide on the side nonsense. And wow, hugely different. Don't get me wrong, constructivism, I want kids to construct knowledge. Constructivism is a theory of knowledge. It's not a theory of teaching. One of the best ways you can get kids to construct knowledge is to deliberately teach them how to do that. The worst thing you could say to a kid, either as a parent or an educator, is do your best. Ban it from your vocabulary. The contrast is challenge. And most kids, particularly from age 11 onwards, thrive on challenge. And if you don't challenge them, they'll challenge you. Up to age 11, some kids will do stuff because they're just compliant. But after that, it's this whole notion how they challenge. And I have actually a fascination and another research project that I've been working on with the team for about 20, 30 years now, looking at adolescents in prison. And those adolescents very much thrive on challenge in the same way that your brightest students do, your sports people do, and your music people do. They want to do those challenges in front of their friends, and hence this notion of reputation enhancement. How do kids enhance their reputation? In fact, it may seem a little weird, but we actually have a major sample going on now because there's about 10% of kids that don't fit our model, and those kids go on to commit the most heinous adult crimes. We also have looked at the kind of issues like school shooting. And the model fits there very nicely. 60 to 80% odd of those kids who do school shooting are males. More than about 60% they do in pairs. Doesn't matter whether they do them individuals or pairs. They build up a world of who they are. They convince themselves, often through social media, through games, etc. And then the rest of their friends don't believe them, or their colleagues, peers, don't believe them. So they show them. And one of the ways we can reduce that is to obviously recognise what their reputation is and how they want to enhance it. And of course, no one wants to enhance the socially undesirable ones. Look at those kids in the school, and there's quite a few of them that don't have a reputation to be enhanced. And there's your drugs, there's your enemy, there's your withdrawals, there's your suicides. In fact, we wrote an op-ed about 4 years ago after Sandy Hook about this whole notion of not privileging the names of the kids afterwards, because that gives us a very strong message to other kids. You can get a reputation if you do these things. And unfortunately, given the latest incident, we got that op-ed again out, and thank you very much, Education Week, because you ran it, and yours is about 4 or 5 weeks ago. But we do know a tremendous amount about those kids, about how they want to thrive on challenge. It just happens to be undesirable. And how do we get those kids into the desirable challenges? And how do we understand the Goldilocks principle of challenge, which I used to argue was not too hard, not too easy, until a group came to me a couple of years ago in California and said, our research shows you're wrong, and they were right. So the Goldilocks principle is not too hard, not too boring. Kids will take on incredible challenges if they're interested. The art, of course, is knowing for each kid what is not too hard, not too boring. And one of the other things we need to know is that when you set the success criteria of the challenge, don't change it. Don't say, oh, you did your best, well done. They're not stupid. They know what you're doing. They didn't get there. They want to thrive to challenge. Otherwise, why do they play those video games? Why do they like sport? Where they can see challenge in front of their eyes. Feedback. The effect size of feedback is 0.7. A third of feedback's negative. I've struggled for the last 15, 20 years trying to understand that dilemma. And I have a bit of pressure on me from publishers to publish a book about feedback, and I said, until I understand that dilemma, no. And the good news, I think I'm there, because in June, Shirley Clark and I are releasing a book on feedback. Let me help you. I want to ask you a question, and I know you're teachers, so I have to make the instructions here very clear. I want you to write a few words in answer to this question, not an essay. If someone came up to you and said, what is feedback? Write some words down. That microphone here. I thought I saw it. There it is. Oh, will it echo? Will it echo? You're good. All right. So what did you write down? Nothing yet. Oh, nothing yet. At least an honest person. I can see some writing.
Data that moves my practice forward.
Okay, can you hear that? Yeah, good. Let's move my practice forward. What did you write, sir?
Authentic response.
Thank you.
Observation.
Observation. What does feedback mean to you?
You know what? You killed me with showing me those words. All those words were floating in my head.
That's okay. It's all right.
I
Distraction.
wrote down specific.
Specific? Okay. Look at that. Could you see yourself? We've asked thousands of teachers, and we've come up with this list from those thousands of teachers. And it's not a trick here in the sense that I hope that you would see what you wrote down on there. And I'm always keen to know if there's any more that you've got that's not there. It doesn't have to start with C. Has anyone got anything that's not up there? Help? I'm sorry, let me come down. Say again? Feedback is a gift? Okay. Improvement there. No, you're right, sir. You do not. We went and asked 1,000+ kids And when we asked them that same question, they wrote them down, we collected them all up. They never said those at all. They said, yours, sir. Feedback is about where to next. So one of the most powerful messages is that you want kids to understand, receive, and to even acknowledge that you gave them feedback. There needs to be where to next. Of course, there's nothing wrong with those. If the feedback, the where to next is based on those, all to the better. So next Sunday when you sit down and you write out all your answers and comments and feedback on the kids' work, at the end, go back and reread them all. Put them in two piles, those that's got some where to next feedback and those that doesn't. Give it back to the students. Wait a day so it's not just memory, and then ask them, what did you understand by the feedback I gave you yesterday? I will bet that for those who get some where to next feedback, they'll have a conversation with you. Those who didn't, you mean I got feedback yesterday? They'll get it wrong, they'll misunderstand. Kids are in this game too. They want to know how to improve. So this whole notion of giving them feedback about improvement, and this is one of the reasons why that feedback is so variable. Too often, feedback doesn't address that question of where to next. So how can we be smarter in doing that? How can we be smarter in perhaps not writing more feedback than the kids actually wrote to us in the first place? And how do we make sure it is on that where to next? And that's the message is about feedback. It's not, I wrote this article many years ago, which I very much regret, because it was about dollops of feedback. It's got nothing to do with the amount of feedback you give. In fact, you actually give quite a lot of feedback in a day. It's about the amount of feedback that is received. And kids receive about 2 to 3 seconds of feedback a day. For a very simple reason. Tomorrow, I meet up with my wife who's flying into New York, and I've been married 34 years. And my secret's simple. I'm the world's best selective listener. I know when she tells me, gives me feedback, I've got it wrong, I have to do it again. So it's easier not to listen, because it costs. And kids are exactly the same. If you give the feedback and cost, they have to do it again, they don't know what's going on, they're not given any cues about how to improve it, of course they're not going to listen to you. They know, for example, when you give feedback to the whole class, it's not about me. And the third part of feedback, besides the where to next, focusing on how they understand it, the third part is very much the best form of feedback is the feedback you get about your impact. And are you good listeners? And do your students give you where to next feedback in the most respectful ways? Here's a question. What percentage of the time in a classroom do you talk? We have a study at the moment in England, so it would never happen in this country. We're up to about 20,000 teachers. We get transcripts of their lessons. We can work out exactly what percentage of time they talk. Got any ideas? 89%. Yeah. Hey, I'm an academic, it's 100%. And you saw the blue zone before. It doesn't mean it's necessarily it's bad. Depends a lot on how you talk. But we do talk a lot. I have a worry that 89 is a wee bit much though, isn't it? And so the question is, how can we look at ways to increase dialogue? But then one of my PhD students has just done a study where she's looked at kids' understanding and desire for feedback, for talk in classrooms. Ouch. Kids above average want you to talk more. They've worked out this game. Listen to what she's saying so I can tell it back to her. If she's talking, I'm not working. If she's telling me, I can be like Mrs. Siri and Mrs. Google and just repeat it back. And look at the kids below average. They want the dialogue. They want to understand why they didn't get it. Tell me more. Help me. Give me the where to next. So the very kids who often are privileged in the classroom are the ones that want you to talk more. I think we've got a problem here. And I know how hard it is to increase the amount of dialogue in the classroom. But one of the other incredible benefits of increasing the amount of dialogue is that's when you hear your impact. We have a grammar of schooling. It's dominated by the facts. Yes, I got in first in visible learning in chapter 11 and said the biggest criticism of this work is that 90% of this work is based on knowing lots. Now with 300,000 kids, I got enough to look at deep as well, but you can look at the learning strategies work we've just done. Teacher questions, 90% are about the facts. What's the message kids are hearing about what you value? When you do assessments or assignments, kids know the more facts are in there, the higher the grade they're going to get, despite what we say. And more importantly, when you ask a student, what does it mean to be a good learner in this class? Oh, knowing lots. Wow, is that the kind of grammar of schooling we really want to privilege? And don't tell me you can't do it because of the press of curriculum or assessment, because you have oodles of teachers of that blue zone that do get into relationships, do get into extending, do get into transfer. And so I worry about that amount of monologue. Yes, showing kids up front what success criteria look like. Go back to those video games. How many of you are stuck with Candy Crush still? Words with Friends? Yeah, I do Words with Friends with my son every night. I have a little bit of perhaps a anal problem of seeing things too specifically and getting too involved, but I'm so proud of the fact I've never played Candy Crush. I'm still so obsessed with Angry Birds. And those games have worked it out. They know your prior achievement, your last score. They know the concept of success criteria. Not too hard, not too boring. They also know something a lot of teachers don't know. You don't lower the success criteria depending where the kid goes. No, you keep it the same. And then what happens? Some of us spend hours and hours and hours on cues and feedback and tips and asking my kids, how do I get there? And what happens when you get there? Not like teachers. Teachers say, oh, well done, hand it in, go out and play. No, they increase it. And some of us will go on for hours and hours and hours with the thrill of learning because we know what success looks like and we know when's good's good enough and we know that that's the aim of what we're trying to get to. And that success criteria gives us a lot of information about where we went wrong and how we can improve. And so this notion of showing what success criteria is, and we've got to get really smart about how we write those success criteria that reflects what we want. And I put it to you as we're starting to do now, and Shirley Clark's starting to do, looking at success criteria about the content and success criteria about how you relate them. And have two for many lessons, because we do want both. Trust. My argument was that so often when we work with schools, we've got to build trust amongst the educators. As we know, educators have been criticised and critiqued enormously over the last 10 to 20 years. They know that if they only last, behave and sit up straight, that you may come and go. And so you've got that massive resistance that can be out there. And sometimes it can take, in our work, 8 to 10 months before we build the trust, before we can start to look at improvement. But I was with my colleague Vivian Robertson a couple of weeks ago and I was talking about this and she said, John, you can't let those kids wait 9 months while you get your act together. She said, trust is you being systematic about what you say and what you do. You go in there on day one. We are going to focus on impact. We're going to focus on helping you and resourcing you to better understand the impact on your kids. We're going to look at what a year's growth looks like. And she said, you build trust by doing it, not by doing programs and whatever. And so, yes, I think she's right. And we all know about the importance of the teacher-student relationship. But sometimes we forget why that is so important. Building up trust is kind of like a bank. And like a bank, it's there to be used. And it's there to be used to maximize error, to allow kids to make mistakes. to allow teachers to say, I don't know how to do this. What happens in your class when a kid puts their hand up and answers and gets the wrong answer? 40 to 50% of the time, you correct the kid. 40 to 50% of the time, you ask another kid to correct the kid. 5 to 10% of the time, you ignore it. And 5 to 10% of the time, you use the error as an opportunity to understand and elaborate. You do not go into any educational situation to learn that which you already know. You go in to learn that you don't know. How do we privilege error and misconceptions? And this is where the importance of trust is. Not just the teacher-student relationship, but how do you build up the student-to-student relationship, which is incredibly powerful. And it's like when we go into schools and ask kids, what do you do when you don't know? And they say, oh, we ask the teacher. No, they don't. They sit there and wait. And particularly if they're struggling kids, they know. Don't put your hand up, because all the other kids will say, there goes old dummy again. And that peer pressure is so powerful. Don't interrupt the teacher's flow. Let them keep talking. How do we legitimize it? And that's the power of teacher-student relationships. So when someone says they've got great student-teacher relationships, I want to see the impact of that. Is it okay in their classroom to say, I don't know? Is it okay to seek help? And yes, wouldn't it be nice if we taught the kids how to seek that help? But to start with, it is building that trust so we can use it. It may look like a cliche, but I think it's critical. I've already commented, I don't care how you teach. I want to focus on learning. And we've spent the last 4 years on our research lab and our science of learning lab looking about how students learn. It's kind of a different story from the visible learning to achievement, because it's a kind of quite a specific focus. We started off with 400 different learning strategies. We tried to get it down to a few. It wasn't as easy as that. But it is having that focus on what it means to be a learner in this classroom. This graph here stunned me. And it's from your country, looking at the employment rate of maths and science students over the last 30, 40 years. And you can see those students with high maths or science and high social skills are very employable. Those with low maths, low social skills are not. But isn't it fascinating? Those with lower maths and high social skills are employable. But those nerds with high maths and low social skills are not. And my interpretation is the social skills are saying what the employment sector wants is people who can work in teams, who can interpret and can collaborate. And if they don't have those skills when they start, it's too hard to teach them. But they don't have sufficient of the content, we can teach that if they are collaborators. And so when I look at the incredible billions of dollars that have been wasted under that word called STEM, where we take teachers out and make them better and blah, blah, and put them back, and what a waste of time. As opposed to, look at the nature of the assessments and assignments kids are doing. Does it involve interpretation, teamwork, collaboration, as well as the content? And this is what I'm talking about, some of the learning strategies. And all that 21st learning stuff that's coming in bothers the heck out of me because it looks like it's out there. We should run programs, as some countries are doing, in collaborative problem solving and creative thinking and that. No. Doing those things, kids get better at it, but it doesn't transfer to maths or science or panel beating or any other area. I put this up with an apology. Yes, it's complicated. This is the science of learning work we're doing and saying that the nature of how you learn depends on whether you're learning surface level or whether you're doing the deep relationship stuff. And yes, it's trying to emphasize we want both. And I have no troubles when you first start to learn that 90% of the work is surface. But I hope it switches to become as much deep by the end. And it's knowing when's the right time to be surface, when's the right time to be deep. In fact, we call our model the Kenny Rogers model. You've got to know when to hold them, you've got to know when to play them. And it's also trying to emphasize that there are 3 inputs and 3 outputs. The skills the kids bring, the wills and their dispositions, and their thrills, their motivations. And yes, I could get to a lot of detail about this because it's fascinated me over the last 5 or 6 years. But it's this notion of how do we understand what learning means? Can we do it? Let me finish by giving you a couple of examples. The first is, in my political role in Australia, what we've done is we've got Fortunately, every state, all the jurisdictions to sign on to national standards for teachers and national standards for principals. And it's had a dramatic effect across the whole country in terms of having a common narrative. And you can see every teacher is either a graduate, a proficient, a highly accomplished, or lead. And our message is that you're proficient to the end of your career, thank you. If you're an airline pilot that's proficient or a doctor that's proficient, thank you. But if you're going to be a highly accomplished and lead teacher, it's quite a step to dump that. It takes a bit of work. We have national moderation to do it, to make sure it happens. We called together 3 years ago all the highly accomplished and lead teachers in the country. We met with them and we said to them, what can we do to better help you? It was a bit sad. They said, wouldn't it be nice if someone thanked us? Wouldn't it be nice if someone knew how to use us? We have incredible expertise out there that we don't use. Sometimes because of our hierarchy of our school is so dependent on experience and not on expertise. And this is happening right throughout the country. We're doing the same with teacher education. Across our 460 programs, I have the job of coming up with a system to improve them. And we're saying we don't care a damn about who comes in, how many years they have, what their program is, how many days they spend in the school. What we care about is, can those programs put the evidence that their graduates can change the learning lives of students? And it's dramatically improving the quality of those programs. In Denmark, we have about 400 or 500 schools. We asked them a mindframes questionnaire. I was a bit jaundiced at the beginning, thinking, no, why wouldn't they just say they did this anyway? No, they didn't. And over the 6 months of implementation of visible learning, you can see some dramatic changes in how teachers think. And it was all based on getting them to work together, to have those conversations about impact, to have those conversations on what does a year's growth look like. They're quite remarkable changes in the short term. It can be done. Last is I want to go to Northern Territory of Australia. As you can see, it's up there. It's very remote. It's very poor socioeconomic status. One of its biggest problems is the average tenure of a teacher or a principal in a school is 8 months. It's hard out there. One of the questions we ask before you go out to one of those schools, what's your hobby? Because what do you do at night and on the weekends? There is nothing. There's not another house in the community. Your nearest place is probably 10 to 12 days drive away. It's very lonely, and I'm absolutely impressed by the teachers who even last 9 months in those schools. And we were asked 4 or 5 years ago, would we take over all 400 schools in the territory? And what we do is we go out and we start by asking the schools to give them kind of a traffic light around about 16 to 20 dimensions. And you can see in the first year, it's not very good, is it? Year 2, year 3, year 4. And now we're going back. The jump from year 3 to year 4 was not that great. What we did initially has worked. Now we're doing something different. But my point is, it took us a year to start to see substantive changes. The biggest change we saw was the teachers now talk to each other about their impact. They don't talk about the programs they're running. And it's had an incredible effect. It's also increased the attendance rate at schools and the retention rate in schools of the educators. It can be done. It can be done if you focus on the mind frames and the way they think, and get away from the distractions about the structure. Get away from the distractions about the assessment and the curriculum and the resources, and focus on how those things have an impact. And what do you mean by impact? But doing it collectively, building up those evaluative capacity to make the difference in your schools, and to continue to ask, how do I know my impact? And just in case you've got some spare time on the way home, I'm still trying to write books about this to get these messages out. And I thank you very much today for having me here and honouring me by being here at Education Week. Thank you very much.